Hey everybody, Eric Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Vortex Venom enclosed optic. As you probably know, Vortex has introduced its newest generation of pistol optics. They started with the open emitter Defender series, and then they moved into the enclosed series, which has a Defender enclosed, and we also have a Defender CCW enclosed, and they also dropped a more budget-friendly option, which they categorize as a recreational shooting optic, which we'll talk about, in the Vortex Venom enclosed, which it is offered. It's a DPP footprint optic, offered in 3 or 6 MOA, quoting a 20,000 hour battery life with top adjustable buttons, feeding off a 2032 battery, which is side load. Obviously, we've moved past the generation mostly of optics, so you have to remove to change the battery. The housing is 6061 aluminum. They didn't go with anything stronger, which is kind of a curious choice. However, it does bring the cost of the optic down, and that's housing in a spherical lens. It comes with 10 daylight and 2 night vision settings in a 0.7 by 0.8 inch window offering, which is pretty damn big. Definitely a contender as far as size goes, considering some of the other enclosed optics out there. Now, the idea behind this optic, they call it recreational shooting. I would more categorize it for kind of being intended for concealed carry, not a quote-unquote duty optic. However, you guys know I put everything through duty optic testing, because I know there are optics out there that are recommended for things like recreational shooting that people will put on duty guns. And even though my testing is relegated to duty, which is duty carry, I do understand that if it meets the duty standard bar, it definitely is going to meet the, I guess, less possible hard use standard of concealed carry, which I personally would appreciate. I'm sure you guys do too. So talking about the overall performance of the optic, obviously mounting is no issue whatsoever. Getting it zeroed, I ran it on a Gen 5 47 for the review purpose, and put it through my normal testing, which includes everything, all conditions that an optic is likely to be used in within reason, and then my standardized durability testing. One of the things that's really easy to notice about this optic is the overall footprint sits pretty low, not low enough, I should say, to where I could use traditional height iron sight for co-witness, but I don't have to go super tall on my suppressor sights if I want to have a co-witness. So on my review gun, I'm using Ameriglow all blacks, which is like my favorite iron sights to throw on a red dot gun if they're made for that gun, and they're traditional XL height. Because now, if you're not familiar, Ameriglow has kind of simplified their height system. Now it's not necessarily like you need to know what the measurement is, but they just give you sizes, like large, extra large, and they'll recommend where it's for, and then XXL, XXXL, so on and so forth. So I'm using a traditional XL height, and I'm getting a lower, I'd say 7th, 8th sight picture. I'm able to get just the top for a sight picture, sight alignment on those iron sights, which I prefer. I want them out of the way of the window as much as possible, but still be there if necessary. And it's very similar to shooting with a suppressor on a gun that has maybe suppressor sights that aren't quite tall enough, or maybe they're not tall enough to get a traditional full unobstructed sight picture. But as long as you can see part of that alignment, the top half, the top 7th, 8th, if you will, you can still get a knowledgeable sight picture if you have to use your irons. The window size is fantastic. That makes acquisition very, very easy in presentation of this gun. I shot it mostly from a duty holster, but I also threw some concealed carry in there. And in daylight, the refresh or the pulse rate is fantastic. So transitioning from target to target is not an issue. The dot brightness settings are good. You're not really going to be wanting for a brighter setting. Some optics, the brightness kind of tops out, and in certain lighting conditions, especially during the day, your dot is a little bit harder to see because of that. Those 10 brightness settings that are considered for daylight going all the way up to max is something I did just to check it out, but it wasn't something I was going to use because it blooms really bad in the brightness that I was shooting it in. Granted, this video is filmed, in December, or I should say November into December. That was when the review process was going on. And days aren't super bright. Sun sits a little bit lower in the sky, so that's a consideration. But I just know from personal experience on brightness settings, this thing's going to be brighter than anything you're going to need. Obviously, if it handles daylight, low light is not going to be an issue whatsoever. But I also put optics through low light testing. The biggest thing about low light is light transmission through that window, right? Everybody's going to coat their lens with some kind of notch filter, so you don't have to bring the brightness up as high to be able to get a usable dot. That notch filter blocks certain transmissions, certain wavelengths, I should say, of light coming through that lens, so you don't have to crank it up as much, otherwise our battery life would probably be a lot less. In low light conditions, traditional sterile low light, but also facing light barriers, and pushing through those light barriers, having light coming back at me is probably a good way to say that. I didn't notice any significant loss in being able to see through the window. Also, because I'm shooting with both eyes open, my non-dominant eye is not looking through the lens. So my two eyes are in my brain combining the data from the optic and from not blocked by the optic to give me a very usable sight picture. That light transmission is probably something you're going to notice a little bit more on maybe a precision rifle, a magnified optic, where you might not keep your non-dominant eye open. Some people still recommend that you do, but you don't have to, especially if you're focusing and trying to shoot really, really far and really, really accurate. Some people close that non-dominant eye, and to be perfectly honest, I know people who have only one eye and they shoot just fine through any optic that they happen to be shooting. Night vision settings, I bring this up in every video just in case it's your first optic video that you're watching. My pedigree brings me to a place where I don't really use night vision settings. And the reason for that has always been, what if I have to rapidly transition from a night vision environment to a white light or a well-lit environment? I do not want to have to be messing with my buttons in order to get a usable red dot when transitioning from my night vision to my visible. So if I'm going from what we used to call green to white. So for me, I check them out. You know, I'm going to see what the night vision settings are like. And we are very, very limited. Again, this gets into a kind of a difficulty of being able to show you guys what I'm talking about. Filming night vision is complicated. I use a direct mount, cold harbor adapter, to mount to one of my Sony cameras, and filming through a Gen 3 Plus PVS 14. That's what I'm doing all my night vision filming. I used to use the cell phone adapters, but it's a pain in the ass. So you're dealing with the PVS 14, the adapter, the camera, the ISO, the f-stop, like everything factors into if I can give you guys a realistic representation of what I see. And even when I get everything set perfectly, I'll look through the PVS 14 and then I'll mount it on the camera and I'm looking for that same view. So I'm messing with the ISO, trying to get a very good representation of what I'm seeing. Then I film it and I'm like, well, it didn't look like that at all. So the dot blooms a little bit more. The lens, you can't see through it quite as well sometimes, depending on what we're dealing with, because we're filming it through a camera versus human perception, which are totally different. So I do the best that I can. And I will say that, especially running an IR light under this thing, if you ever shoot red dots under night vision and you can see your dot but you can't see your target, if you push IR light down range, it solves the problem. It polarizes the target and allows you to get your hits. So from a handgun night vision shooting perspective, which is a very small niche need, it's going to perform fine. Does it have the same light transmission of the Defender enclosed? It absolutely does not. It is noticeably a little bit worse. I don't know if it's a different lens. I imagine it has to be, or maybe it's just a different notch filter or whatever. But through the enclosed Defender, I feel like I did get a little bit more light transmission through there. But again, pushing IR light down range from an IR X300V or whatever you have, it kind of renders the problem academic. If you're using binocular night vision, like 14s or 31s or something like that, you're probably going to notice it anyway. Overall performance, like I said, shooting fast, shooting rapid transitions from target to target, everything was fantastic. Nothing stood out to me in that regard. So all the daytime shooting, I didn't really experience any issues at all, except the battery cap. The battery cap on this thing likes to loosen up. And it likes to loosen up every 300 or 400 rounds. And I would crank this cap down and put the tool that they provide with it in there and get it nice and tight. I wasn't torquing it, which I probably should have been, but I can't put their tool in my torque wrench, so that creates a problem. Anyway, the battery cap would come loose, and I don't know if it's just a sample size of 1 or whatever, but my advice would be take a Q-tip and a little bit of thread locker and put 1 or 2 dots somewhere on the threading when you install your battery. Something you can force to overcome. Obviously don't use red, use purple or blue. That way you're probably not going to have that problem. As far as battery housing, the actual housing features, I like the top-mounted batteries, or top-mounted controls, top-mounted buttons. They're recessed, they've got a little protection ridge there in the middle for drops, which we're going to talk about. Mounting on the side, even when they recess them, don't get me wrong, you can work with them, but I always worry about, especially for concealed carry, my belt buckle or the environment or whatever, pressing in against those adjustments and turning my brightness down or too high up, which again, if I was going to choose a problem, I'd rather it be too bright than too dim. So top mounting the buttons to me makes a lot of sense. When I did shoot it from concealed, obviously, no issue whatsoever. Acquisition is good. The optic doesn't sit too high. I've got a lot of window. So getting my dot on presentations is pretty damn easy. And I still probably have more rounds on dot presentation from an RMR, which has a much smaller window. And that's kind of how I trained. So moving into some of these bigger optic windows, it's kind of like being spoiled. And I appreciate that. If you're new to red dots, building your skill set on one of these larger windows is going to probably give you a much smaller path to success. Shorter path to success. Durability, right? So this is a recreationally categorized, or that's how Vortex says it. They call it a recreational optic. And that's a nebulous word, recreational. What do they mean? Well, they're probably hedging their bets. They know, just like all these other companies know, when they say, hey, this is for sports shooting, it's not for military or duty or whatever, people are still going to put that on there. So they're kind of hedging their bets in case anybody wants to complain, be like, hey, well, you know, you broke it, but we told you it was for recreational use only, so you shouldn't have been, you know, halo jumping with it or whatever. That's an extreme, exaggerated example. But as you know, I'm going to do everything with duty testing, which includes slide manipulation, so one-handed manipulations. If I can't use my other hand for whatever reason, if I'm manipulating the slide. Obviously, this optic has a great purchase on it. The body is noticeably different from what we get from the Defender series, so I don't have those front meat tenderizer stippling, I guess. There's a word for it. I forget it, and I'm not going to stand here and try to figure it out. Or remember it, I should say. So manipulations are easy. It's almost a 90-degree angle there on the front. The lens is nice and recessed. You would really have to pick the wrong surface to manipulate with this gun in order to cause any significant damage to that lens at all, because it sits pretty deep in there. And the rear window, thankfully, sits pretty deep inside the shroud as well, which is, I found to be just as important for incidental contact with the environment. So one-handed manipulations, no issues there. As you guys know, every 500 rounds I do a drop test, but during every 500 rounds, I'm also doing some one-handed manipulations. So I got to my drop test. First, let me show you guys my zero group, which is fired on this Gen 5 Glock 47, and I have a Faxon suppressor barrel in it. So we're just showing the inherent accuracy of the zero. We're not talking about the accuracy of the barrel gun combination. So here's a 5-round group. I fired 124 grain gold dot, 25 yards, bag supported. And then after that, we got into the drop test, like I said, every 500 rounds. So here are your drops. Now, in that third drop, I did break the lens, or I should say gravity and circumstance and chance broke the lens. I've got a crack on the right side and a little bit of a crack in the upper left corner. But when I checked it, zero held, so I got right back to the review. Just because the lens cracked, does that mean I have to stop using the optic? No. So I do have a cracked lens, but it did not lose zero. Obviously, I check right after that drop, especially if something breaks, but I check every time. And I got into another 500 rounds, which I finished and then got to my final drop test. And then, of course, I went ahead and checked that zero. So here is my final 5-round group fired after that 4th drop test. So zero maintained even with a lens breakage. Now, obviously, if you break your lens, and you can get it replaced as soon as possible, Vortex has a fantastic warranty. This optic is a fantastic price point. It's kind of up to you if you want to go with a budget optic for personal defense. And that's why Vortex is hedging their bets a little bit, I think, by calling it a recreational use optic. It is definitely... It's not even in the same category. It's multiple categories above its namesake. The old Venom was not a good optic, except for maybe recreational shooting. And even that might have been a bridge too far for the durability of the original Venom. So being able to say that this new generation of Venom, not only is it enclosed, but I wouldn't balk at all. If somebody's like, hey, I use a Venom for concealed carry, I'd be like, fantastic. If somebody's like, hey, I use a Venom for duty carry, or my department issues Venom enclosed for duty carry, I'd be like, okay, you know, it's probably going to be good, but you should have stepped it up to the next in the series if you wanted to go Vortex specific and get the Defender enclosed. But it's definitely, I mean, this is a great time to be alive when it comes to optics because they just keep getting stronger, they keep getting better, performance keeps improving, and companies that previously made recreational only or hobby optics like Vortex when it came to pistol optics are now producing optics that can hang with optics that cost twice as much. And that's fantastic because ultimately the race towards the bottom is as durable as hell and as cheap as possible. Well, as inexpensive as possible. So if you're curious about the Vortex Venom enclosed, it does everything it says it's going to do and a little bit more at a really low price point. Till next time, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, train accordingly.